So I worked on over the evening on updating this LiDAR stuff, and I'm kind of excited. I learned how to do something that I want you to be able to do. So, and then we can talk a little bit. I posted the project criteria, and we can start thinking about that as well. So we're going to talk about LiDAR today, which is light detection and ranging. And LiDAR is a type of remote sensing that uses what's called an active collector. So if you think about what is remote sensing is basically getting data without actually physically going on to the landscape and measuring it. So if I were to go out in the field and measure soil type, I would be putting in some kind of a soil pit, and that would not be remote sensing. So your eyes are remote sensors, right? Because we can stand here and look at the environment and take notes about that without actually going all the way over to an oak tree to know that it's an oak tree. And our eyes are passive collectors because we are just perceiving the reflection of light waves. So we're not sending out any information from our eyes. We're just receiving everything. So the Landsat satellite images that we're going to use Thursday are also passive collectors. So the Landsat satellites have cameras on board, and the cameras collect different wavelengths for the electromagnetic spectrum. They'll collect, the visible spectrum, and that's what we see when we look at a regular photo. But they also will collect the near-infrared structure. They'll collect thermal structures. That's what's being used right now in Hawaii to look at the potential areas that are cracks showing up. This combination of remote sensing and LiDAR as a way to kind of predict where these cracks might open based on the heat signature, and then small fissures that can be seen with LiDAR. So LiDAR is a remote technology, usually by drones or small or low elevation planes, and it's an active sensor. So LiDAR sends out pulses of light, usually laser beams, light beams, and the sensor then measures how long it takes that beam to reflect and bounce back up to the collector. And so when we're looking at LiDAR, we're looking at determining elevation based on how long it takes the sensor to return. And so LiDAR sends out 160,000 pulses of light per second. And so when you get LiDAR data, these things are huge. And it will create millions and millions of points. So when the LiDAR hits the treetop, power lines, houses, and it can filter down through the ground, and there are so many pulses that you can get into the forest canopy. So you can think about walking out in the woods in a pretty densely canopied tree cover, but there's still light coming through. And if there's light coming through, then the LiDAR pulses are also coming through. Some of those pulses never hit the ground. They'll hit the top of a tree and bounce back, or they'll hit a rooftop and bounce back. And so when we look at LiDAR returns, we're looking at these different elevation data that is being determined based on the time that it takes from the light pulse to be sent until it returns. And so you can have one pulse bounce many times. So it could hit the top of the tree, which would be the first return, and then it continues on down to the middle of the tree, which would be the second return, and then it might go down to the lower branches on a third return, and then the fourth return, or the last return, it's hitting the ground. And so you get these different signals of return time with your LiDAR data. And once you get that data, you can choose the different returns. You can filter out the returns and say, I just want to look at that fourth return. I want to create what's called a bare earth model. I think of it as scorched earth because the image looks like there are no trees, no buildings, no houses, nothing. It's just kind of if you were able to eradicate everything. And so with that ground or bare earth point, you can create an incredibly detailed elevation model, or a DEM. And you're going to do that in this lab today. So when you make a DEM, you filter in ArcGIS. They have a nice, sweet little filter tool. You go into the conversions. You convert from a raster, from a LAS file to a raster file. And then once you have your DEM, like you saw with the price tutorial on rasters, then you can do slope and aspect and hillshade and distance and all of those different products you can use with your ground level DEM. So I was talking with Eric from the Friends of Trees, and one of the things they needed was canopy cover. He said they don't have a very detailed canopy cover data for the area, and so I was trying to find out how do you do that, and I found kind of a simple way that we can approximate that. So while you can create the ground earth, you can also create a digital surface model, which is a DSM. And the DSM is the image of everything that's at the top. It's that first return, right? And so then being able to use the digital elevation model and the digital surface model, then you can figure out the real height of things. So example, if my first return, if my ground return is 400 feet, so that's my bare earth elevation point is 400 feet, but my first return is 512 feet, doesn't mean the trees are 512 feet. It means that the trees are the ground elevation minus that 512. So then I've got the height of features here. So that's called a canopy height, or NDSM is the canopy height. And with the canopy height, you can use that to kind of understand what your canopy cover is. LiDAR also offers intensity, and in the lab, the Baltimore evaluation lab you're going to do, the author of that tutorial asks you to kind of look at the intensity. And the intensity is just the strength of the return. And that strength can be from a lot of different things. One is how absorbing or reflective is the surface that it's bouncing off, right? So water does not return very much. So you can't get, with most LiDAR data, you can't get good information about the channel underneath water surfaces because you don't get any bounce return from LiDAR. But it also, the intensity can be the angle of the flight. So when the plane is flying over, it makes multiple paths, and we'll look at some of those, or you'll be able to detect them. And some of that sending comes directly to the nadir or perpendicular to the surface, but some of it also goes out at an angle. So the return is a little different. And then typically the points that you get back from a vendor, so they have LiDAR vendors, which are people who have the planes, the equipment, and then the software to take that point cloud or all that point data and classify it into ground points, low vegetation, medium vegetation, high vegetation, buildings, noise, and they have the data classified, which is amazing if you can ever find that. Transmission towers, wires, you can go through your LiDAR and just select based on that classification and pull out those elements. We are not that lucky to have that detailed classification, and it's really expensive to get a vendor who will do that type of work. There's a company called the American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, and the need for photogrammetrists is huge right now. And it's called Aspers, and they have a great magazine and wonderful website. But they have kind of standardized the classification process so that if I get LiDAR from different vendors, they should all kind of fit in the same, so that a building in one vendor is the same as a building collected from another vendor when we do that. So and this was as I mentioned earlier, and I'll post this for you, this was shamelessly copied from this website I found last night that I thought was just really clear and very detailed, enough detailed for what we're going to do. And his statement was, if you want to do anything about surface topology, you need to know LiDAR to do that. But he said it is a beast. And I have a terabyte drive that is pretty much maxed out with the LiDAR for the Willamette Valley. I mean, these are huge files. But they are so amazing in order to give you the detail you want. So one of the things you're going to do with the first part of the tutorial, the last step, she has you create a workflow, which means if I give you raw last points, how do you get them into ArcGIS and do anything with them? And that's kind of what this lab will walk you through. But basically, the LiDAR points are stored as what's called a LAS file, or a point cloud. People refer to it as a point cloud. And in ArcGIS, you need to create what's called a LAS data set. And the LAS data set then allows you to bring in your LAS file, and there is a LAS toolbar that lets you kind of look and filter at the data. And so that's probably the most basic. You can also do bring it in as multi-point files, which used to be the way they were done before the LAS data set was created. And I've only done that a couple times, and it's pretty detailed. So that is where this is from. So I just, who's using LiDAR? I was talking to my daughter on the way to work this morning, and I said, I'm all excited. I'm going to do LiDAR today. And she said, what is it and who uses it? So, and I had just answered this last night. So if you're a geologist, right now you're looking at Hawaii with LiDAR. The Oso landslide in 2014, which was a deep-seated landslide, once they looked at the LiDAR data from that, they were able to identify what they didn't know was a headscarp crack, and they're beginning to identify those in other areas now. If you're looking at riparian areas, you're going to derive a DEM. You're going to look at those really very fine, small tributaries. They're really easy to see with a DEM, more so than the data that you've been looking at previously. So if I look at this, this is a 30-meter DEM. You can kind of see that crack here. Here's a 10-meter DEM, and this is what LiDAR would give you with a 2-meter LiDAR visualization. And you can see much more detail. You can see road beds on this one. So riparian, who else do I have in here? Foresters. Okay, so you're going to need to know LiDAR for the tree structure, and I'll show you what that looks like. I think we did that in 151 with the Fugro website, which was pretty cool. I thought this was fascinating. I did not know, but Google self-driving cars are going to be able to use, are going to need to use LiDAR to understand what's going on there. Archaeologists are using this right now. There are some citizen scientist websites out there that have created LiDAR sites of some archaeological sites in South America, and they are using citizen scientists to look at these online LiDAR sites and look for irregularities in the landscape. And so if we had 50 people looking at the same LiDAR area and 20 of them thought there was an irregularity, that would be a point that they would highlight and then do some analysis on. So it's kind of a great way to crowdsource some of your science. And then there was a bunch of other I don't know. I did not. That's not my typo. I think that was their typo. So moisture content, you can do that from space. Catching tax evaders, I love this. Looking for new construction and building, that's with remote sensing. Retail earning markets by counting cars in a parking lot from remote sensing. higher insurance premiums, so you can get very detailed LiDAR flood plain data, and now FEMA is being asked to use this data rather than the 20 meter, 30 meter DEMs they've been using. I love the fraudulent crop insurance claims, being able to use this and looking at mineral deposits. So all of these things are using LiDAR. And so there is a website that's called Open Topography, and it has, let's take a look at that. It has LiDAR data that's free. It's a NSF project. If any of you choose to think about doing LiDAR as your project, control scroll. Okay, I can do that. So here are the areas that have LiDAR coverage. And if you want to select large areas, then you have to register. It's free, but they send you the data, or you can just grab a small section of this, and then you have LiDAR point cloud to work with, which it's pretty cool. So